Lieutenant Mark strode into the war room with the confidence of a man used to command. The fluorescent lights glinted off the polished metal surfaces, highlighting rows of screens, scattered papers and maps strewn across the massive central table. The hum of machines and quiet chatter of intelligence analysts filled the space, but barely noticed it. His eyes swept across the room, scanning for familiar faces, noting the newcomers, evaluating who could be trusted in this high-stakes operation. He prided himself on assessing people quickly, identifying potential threats and weaknesses within moments. Yet today, something felt different. At the far end of the room, a figure moved with a precision that immediately drew his attention. She was tall, fit, with short hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her movements were controlled, deliberate, almost surgical, and there was a calmness about her that set her apart from the usual hurried energy of military personnel preparing for a mission. Had seen confident officers before, but there was something unspoken in her posture, an aura that hinted at a depth of training he couldn't immediately place. "Lieutenant," a voice called, snapping him out of his thoughts. He turned to see Commander Sarah stepping forward. Her expression was neutral, professional, yet there was a subtle intensity in her eyes that seemed to pierce right through him. She saluted crisply, the gesture exact and flawless, reflecting a discipline that recognized instantly as exceptional, though he couldn't quite identify its source. "Commander," replied, returning the salute with a slightly awkward stiffness. He had been briefed on a new officer joining the unit, but he had not expected someone of her presence. Something about her unsettled him, not because he felt threatened, but because she exuded a quiet authority that didn't rely on rank or ego. As Sarah took her place at the table, noticed how she positioned herself. She didn't sit like a newcomer trying to assert herself. She didn't hover like someone unsure of her role. She simply placed her hands on the table, scanning the maps and intelligence reports with a sharp, analytical gaze. Every detail seemed to matter to her. Every movement she made was precise, economical, deliberate. Felt a twinge of irritation. Here he was, the commanding officer of this operation, and yet he found himself instinctively paying attention to her every action. "Good morning, everyone," Sarah began, her voice calm but firm. "I've reviewed the preliminary intel on Operation Black Falcon. I believe there are several critical points that require immediate attention before we proceed." The room went quiet. Analysts and officers looked at her, some nodding subtly, others exchanging curious glances. Irritation flared slightly. Who was this woman to walk in and immediately suggest corrections to operational plans he had helped craft? He had led countless missions. He knew the importance of precise intelligence and chain-of-command discipline. Yet Sarah spoke not with arrogance but with clarity, confidence, and knowledge. Cleared his throat, leaning slightly over the table. "Commander, I appreciate your input, but these plans have been vetted at multiple levels. Are you suggesting we need to make changes?" His tone carried authority but also an edge, a subtle challenge. Sarah met his gaze directly, unflinching. "Lieutenant, I'm suggesting we consider additional contingencies. There's a pattern in the recent surveillance reports that hasn't been addressed. If we overlook it, we risk operational compromise." Her words were calm, almost conversational, but felt the weight behind them. This wasn't a casual suggestion from an inexperienced officer. It was a calculated observation that could impact the mission's outcome. He bristled at the challenge to his authority, yet deep down, a small part of him recognized the truth in her analysis. He didn't know why, but he sensed that underestimating her could be dangerous. The tension in the room was palpable. Colleagues exchanged glances, sensing the silent clash between two strong personalities. Known for his quick temper and decisive actions, had rarely met someone who could maintain composure in his presence. Sarah, meanwhile, remained perfectly still, her focus entirely on the intelligence before her, giving nothing away emotionally. As the briefing continued, noticed the subtle ways she demonstrated her competence. Her suggestions were not broad or theoretical. They were precise, tactical, actionable. She pointed out specific vulnerabilities, potential responses from the opposition, and alternative strategies, all while maintaining a calm and collected demeanor, felt a mixture of admiration and irritation. He had spent years honing his leadership and analytical skills, yet here was someone who matched, or perhaps exceeded, him in both areas, without even raising her voice. During a short break, observed Sarah from across the room. She leaned over a map, tracing movements with her finger, eyes scanning the data, lips barely moving as she calculated probabilities and outcomes. There was no hesitation, no doubt, only focus. A small smirk appeared on her face as she noticed a minor error in one of the operational overlays. Felt a flicker of doubt. Was this woman really just an intelligence officer, or did she have experience he couldn't even fathom? The room slowly refilled as the break ended. Sarah straightened, turning her attention to Lieutenant. If we synchronize the units according to this revised schedule, we can reduce exposure by nearly 30%. Jaw tightened. 30%. That was not a trivial margin. It could mean the difference between mission success and failure. He forced a nod, masking his surprise. "I'll review the proposal," he said, though he already knew he would. As the meeting adjourned, lingered, watching Sarah gather her notes with methodical precision. There was a quiet intensity about her that made him uneasy and intrigued at the same time. He didn't yet know that Sarah was no ordinary officer. She was a Navy SEAL, one of the few women in the elite unit, trained in combat, tactics, intelligence, and survival under the harshest conditions. At that moment, he only saw a competent, assertive officer who had challenged his authority, and that alone was enough to plant a seed of tension that would soon erupt in a way he could never have anticipated. Confident and unyielding, had no idea that this war room, with its buzzing screens and maps, was about to witness a confrontation that would test not only his leadership, but his understanding of courage, discipline, and respect. As he left the room, he couldn't shake the feeling that this new arrival would change everything, both for the mission and for him personally. He just didn't yet know how dangerously right he was. The war room buzzed with controlled chaos as the next briefing began. Analysts murmured over monitors, projecting satellite images, troop movements, and encrypted communications onto the massive screens lining the walls. Lieutenant Mark positioned himself at the head of the table, his presence commanding attention, but the moment his eyes met Sarah's, a spark of tension ignited. She sat across from him, posture rigid yet composed, her gaze scanning the intelligence displays with surgical precision. There was no hesitation in her movements, only certainty, a trait that found both irritating and unsettling. "All right, team," began, trying to assert dominance immediately. "We're here to finalize plans for Operation Black Falcon. The intelligence looks solid, and we need everyone on the same page before we move forward. Any questions?" Sarah raised a hand, her calm tone cutting through the ambient hum of the room. "Lieutenant, I've reviewed the latest drone surveillance and intercepted communications. There's a pattern in the opposition's movements that hasn't been addressed. If we ignore it, we risk exposure along the northern corridor." Eyes narrowed. He had studied the reports himself. He knew the terrain, the risk calculations, the timing. Yet Sarah spoke with a precision and clarity that made him pause. "Commander," he said, his voice tight with irritation, "we've already accounted for the northern corridor. Your suggestion is noted, but it's redundant. Let's focus on the confirmed intel, not theoretical possibilities." Sarah's lips pressed into a thin line, but she didn't flinch. "Lieutenant, it's not theoretical. The patterns I'm seeing indicate a coordinated effort to exploit exactly that corridor. Ignoring it could compromise the mission entirely. I'm not suggesting we overhaul the plan, only that we integrate this contingency. 30% reduction in exposure, if implemented immediately." The room grew silent. Analysts shifted uncomfortably, sensing the undercurrent of confrontation. Pride flared. He was a man accustomed to having control, to issuing orders that were followed without question. Yet here was Sarah, asserting herself with calm authority, challenging his decisions with hard data and not once acknowledging rank. He leaned forward, slamming his palm lightly against the table to punctuate his words. "Commander, I appreciate your analysis, but I make the final call here. You're welcome to suggest, but the plan stands as approved. Understand?" Sarah's gaze never wavered. "I understand, Lieutenant. I also understand the consequences of ignoring critical data. You have the authority to decide, but the mission's success depends on integrating this information." The words were delivered evenly, without emotion, but the weight behind them hit like a physical blow. He could feel the temperature in the room rise. He looked around, noticing his subordinates exchanging wary glances. Some were intrigued by her confidence, others were anxious, anticipating a clash that could escalate further. Patience snapped. "Commander, enough, I don't need a lecture, the plan is set, we move forward." Sarah leaned slightly forward, her eyes flashing, not with anger but with controlled intensity. "Lieutenant, with all due respect, executing this plan without adjustment could jeopardize lives. I'm simply presenting the facts. The decision is yours, but disregard comes at a risk." A tense pause followed. Jaw tightened. He felt his blood pressure spike as frustration and pride battled against reason. This was no ordinary officer defying him. She was calm, precise, and, disturbingly, unshakable. Every instinct in him screamed to assert dominance, to reestablish control in a way that only he could. "You don't understand military hierarchy," barked, standing abruptly. His chair scraped against the floor. "I am responsible for the outcome. I do not need corrections from a new officer, regardless of rank." Sarah sat back slightly, her expression neutral. "I understand hierarchy, Lieutenant. I also understand risk. Command doesn't prevent disaster, it mitigates it. Your call, but I cannot remain silent when the consequences are foreseeable." The clash between the two officers had drawn the attention of everyone in the room. Analysts stopped typing. Subordinates leaned forward, their curiosity palpable. The room felt like a powder keg, every heartbeat stretching the tension. Pride and temper, combined with Sarah's unwavering resolve, created an unspoken question in the air. Who would give in first? Face flushed, frustration boiling over, he clenched his fists. "Enough!" he shouted, his voice echoing off the walls. "I said the plan stands." Sarah's response was calm, almost serene. "Understood, Lieutenant, but I will hold you accountable for the results, as will the mission." It was the final straw. Lunged forward instinctively, a motion born of anger rather than strategy. His fist connected with her jaw before anyone could react. The room froze. Every eye in the war room widened. Analysts and officers collectively held their breath. Sarah staggered slightly, but only enough to absorb the impact. Her SEAL training had kicked in instantly: balance, control, anticipation. She pivoted with subtle precision, absorbing the force while keeping her posture solid. Expecting shock or submission, felt a ripple of disbelief. She did not stumble, did not shout, did not retaliate violently. She simply fixed him with a cold, unwavering stare that communicated a message far stronger than words could convey. He had misjudged her completely. "Lieutenant," she said calmly, her voice carrying across the room with quiet authority, "violence does not establish leadership. Knowledge and discipline do." The words cut him deeper than any reprimand could. The entire team now understood this was no ordinary officer. Sarah's demeanor, her control, her readiness, her ability to remain composed under assault, screamed of elite training. The whispers began immediately. "She's a SEAL," one analyst murmured under his breath. Mind raced. He had just struck someone who could, in a split second, incapacitate him without effort. Panic, shame, and disbelief warred inside him. Every muscle in his body tensed as he realized the magnitude of his mistake. This was not an officer to challenge casually. This was a warrior, one of the few trained to operate in the most extreme conditions imaginable, and he had just crossed a line. Sarah's calm eyes met his, unwavering, commanding, and utterly terrifying in their quiet authority. Swallowed hard. The war room had become a stage for an unspoken battle, the lieutenant's bruised pride versus the unyielding discipline of a Navy SEAL. In that suspended moment, knew the dynamic of this team had shifted irrevocably. Sarah's skills, her insight, her precision, all of it was now undeniable. The realization was like a cold wave washing over him. He had underestimated her, and it could have been catastrophic. The room remained silent for several long beats. Analysts avoided eye contact, unsure whether to intervene, and felt his shoulders slump, a rare crack in his usually imposing composure. Sarah, meanwhile, adjusted her notes, her movements precise, professional, and unshaken. She had proven dominance not through anger but through calm control. Understood, even in that first moment, that any future clash would be fought on terms he could no longer dictate. She had earned a silent authority through skill and restraint, and he had just paid the price for his hubris. The incident marked a turning point. In that brief clash, the war room had witnessed the collision of two forces, raw authority versus disciplined expertise. The room's energy shifted, charged with tension and anticipation. Realized he would need to rethink everything he knew about leadership, respect, and the true power that Sarah commanded. As the team slowly resumed their positions, whispers floated across the room, eyes darting between the lieutenant and the new commander. The war room had become more than a place of planning. It had become a test of patience, judgment, and recognition of real skill. Knew that from this point forward, the mission, the team, and even his own career would never be the same. The moment Lieutenant Fist struck Commander Sarah's jaw, the war room froze in a suspended, almost surreal silence. Analysts mid-typing stopped dead. Intelligence officers mid-discussion held their breath. Even the low hum of monitors and the flicker of fluorescent lights seemed to pause, as if the room itself were holding judgment. Face burned with a mix of anger, shock, and an unfamiliar, creeping panic. This had been impulsive, unthinking, a rash act driven by ego and frustration, but the reality of what he had done hit him immediately. Sarah did not stumble. She did not cry out. She did not respond with the instinctive anger that many would have. Instead, she swayed slightly, pivoting just enough to absorb the impact without losing balance. Every muscle, honed by years of Navy SEAL training, engaged in perfect synchronization. Her body remained a study in control and readiness, a living testament to discipline and unyielding resilience. Expectation of dominance shattered against the invisible wall of her composure. The lieutenant's chest heaved as he processed the situation. This was not a simple officer he had struck in a moment of arrogance. This was a warrior who could dismantle him with a thought, a fraction of a second's movement. Every instinct in him screamed to retreat, yet pride and humiliation locked his body in place. Sarah's eyes, steady and unflinching, met his. There was no rage, no shock, only a piercing clarity that assessed him, the room, and the unfolding consequences. "Lieutenant," she said calmly, her voice slicing through the tense silence like a razor, "violence does not establish authority. Knowledge, discipline, and control do." The words reverberated in mind. They were calm, deliberate, precise, delivered without malice but carrying a weight far heavier than anger ever could. He felt the eyes of the entire room on him, sensing the collective understanding. He had misjudged Sarah entirely. Analysts exchanged whispers. One muttered under his breath, "She's a SEAL." Another simply shook his head in disbelief. Hands shook slightly, an unfamiliar tremor betraying the shock of the moment. He had acted impulsively, relying on brute force, only to be confronted with a calm, disciplined force far superior to his own. He realized the gravity of his error. He had struck someone who could, in moments, neutralize him without effort, and he had no right to challenge her. The room was no longer just a place of planning. It had become a stage for the consequences of hubris. Sarah, meanwhile, regained composure instantly. She adjusted her notes, sliding them neatly across the table as if the incident had barely happened. Her demeanor remained professional, controlled, and unshaken. on the other hand, felt the sting not just in his pride but in the eyes of his subordinates. Their stares were not accusatory. They were observational, noting every detail. The lieutenant's impulsive temper, the woman's unparalleled control, and the sudden inversion of authority in the room. The tension lingered thickly. Voice came out hoarse and forced as he attempted to regain control. "Commander, that was unnecessary." His words faltered under the weight of his own realization. Sarah's gaze softened slightly, though her composure never wavered. "Unnecessary, perhaps, but predictable," she said evenly. "The consequences of underestimating your team can be severe, Lieutenant. Consider this a lesson in judgment rather than a personal attack." Opened his mouth, ready to argue but found no words. Any rationalization seemed hollow in the face of her calm assessment. Every instinct told him to retreat, to apologize, to reassess not only the mission but his own behavior. He swallowed hard, feeling an unfamiliar knot of guilt and fear tighten in his chest. Across the room, whispers spread like wildfire. Analysts and junior officers exchanged knowing glances, some nodding subtly, others barely hiding smiles of incredulity. The dynamic had shifted. Authority was no longer a matter of rank alone. It was now about skill, precision, and the ability to maintain composure under extreme pressure. Sarah had established a silent dominance that no title could override. Tried to steady himself, taking a slow, deep breath. He had been trained to lead, to assert, to make split-second decisions under pressure. Yet here he was, confronted by someone whose very presence demanded respect, whose skill and discipline dwarfed his own in ways he had only just begun to understand. The realization gnawed at him. This was not a challenge to his ego. It was a lesson in humility, and he was painfully aware of his failure to read the situation correctly. Sarah spoke again, her voice low but carrying authority. "Lieutenant, the mission does not wait for personal grudges. We have objectives to meet and lives depend on decisions made here. Focus on the task, not on asserting dominance where it is unearned." Her words resonated through the room, quiet yet profound. Felt the weight of responsibility pressing down, mingled with the sting of personal failure. He had thought control was about authority, about rank, about force. But Sarah had demonstrated a truth he could not ignore. Control came from skill, knowledge, and composure, not brute strength. The rest of the team slowly resumed their positions, the incident settling like a heavy shadow over the room. Analysts returned to monitors, officers returned to notes, but the air remained charged. Every glance at Sarah carried a new awareness. Every gesture she made seemed deliberate, purposeful, a silent assertion that her capabilities extended far beyond ordinary expectations. For the first time in years, felt a profound uncertainty. He had assumed he knew the hierarchy, the limits of authority, and the boundaries of respect. All of it had been upended in a single, shocking moment. He realized that from now on, he could no longer rely on assumptions or appearances. He would have to observe, assess, and earn trust in a different way, through respect, not fear. As Sarah adjusted her position, preparing to continue the briefing, forced himself to nod. His pride burned, but his mind raced with strategies to recover both authority and credibility. He understood that the lesson had only begun. This was more than a confrontation. It was a turning point that would redefine leadership, teamwork, and his understanding of the women and men who served alongside him. The war room, once simply a place of intelligence and planning, had become a crucible. Recognized the truth in a flash. The line between authority and arrogance was razor-thin, and crossing it could have devastating consequences. Sarah had demonstrated more leadership in a few moments of composed action than he had in years of command by default. And as the team watched, quietly recalibrating their own understanding of hierarchy and skill, knew one undeniable fact: he had just underestimated a Navy SEAL. That misjudgment could have cost him everything, and the realization of it weighed heavily on his conscience. The incident would not be forgotten. It would be discussed, analyzed, and remembered, not as an act of violence, but as the moment when true authority revealed itself through skill, discipline, and unwavering control. The war room returned to work, but the atmosphere was irrevocably altered. Sarah had not raised her voice, had not threatened, had not struck back. Yet in that stillness, she had commanded far more respect than had ever imagined possible. The lieutenant, humbled and shaken, began the slow, painful process of acknowledging the gap between perceived authority and earned respect. And in the back of his mind, he could not shake the unspoken warning. One misstep, one underestimation, and he could face consequences far more severe than embarrassment. The punch was over. The lesson had only begun. The war room was still humming with quiet activity, but Lieutenant Mark felt as if he were moving through a fog. The moment of striking Sarah played repeatedly in his mind, each replay sharpening the sting of humiliation. He had miscalculated. He had acted impulsively, arrogantly, relying on rank to assert control, and he had been entirely wrong. For the first time in his career, felt the unsettling awareness that his authority could be challenged, not just socially, but physically, mentally, and tactically. And not by just any officer, but by someone he had underestimated completely. As he struggled to regain composure, subtle details began to surface in his memory, like pieces of a puzzle he had been blind to before. The way Sarah had absorbed the punch, her perfect balance and control, her lack of flinch or surprise, it all indicated training far beyond the scope of an ordinary intelligence officer. She hadn't merely defended herself. She had remained in command, silently, invisibly asserting authority through skill rather than confrontation. Pulse quickened as he remembered her earlier moves in the briefing. The precise placement of markers on the operational maps, the calculated suggestions for minimizing exposure, the almost imperceptible gestures that indicated a deep understanding of tactics and battlefield psychology. These were not the behaviors of a typical officer. These were the behaviors of someone who had been forged in extreme conditions, someone trained to survive and to dominate under pressure. His mind raced, tracing back every interaction, every subtle demonstration of competence. He recalled how she had entered the room, her eyes scanning and calculating, noting every detail without hesitation. Her posture calm yet alert, her controlled breathing, the way she communicated without arrogance or hesitation. All of it painted a picture had missed in his first impression. And now, after the incident, the truth hit him with the force of a revelation he could not ignore. This was a Navy SEAL. The realization brought a cold sweat to his brow. SEALs were elite beyond anything had faced in his own military experience. Their training was designed to push limits, to test mental and physical endurance, to prepare them for the most dangerous missions imaginable. They were not only survivors but leaders, strategists, and warriors. The very woman he had struck embodied all of these qualities in a single, composed, terrifyingly effective package. Whispers from the team filtered through his fog of disbelief. "She's a SEAL," one analyst murmured again, barely audible. Stomach sank further. His subordinates knew what he had yet to fully accept, that the very person he had assaulted could, without hesitation, neutralize him in seconds if she had chosen to do so, and he had provoked her. Mind was a whirlwind of guilt, fear, and reluctant awe. He had prided himself on control, on decisiveness, on command presence. But he realized now that he had confused confidence with competence, rank with skill. Sarah had just demonstrated what true competence looked like: calm under pressure, analytical in thought, disciplined in action, and utterly unconcerned with ego. He reflected on the aftermath. The room had been silent, waiting, watching. Analysts and officers had witnessed the clash without interference, recognizing instinctively the difference between mere rank and genuine authority. Could feel their eyes on him now, evaluating, perhaps even judging, but also aware that he had underestimated someone of extraordinary capability. This was no longer about personal pride. It was about understanding the hierarchy of skill, and he had been blind to it. Sarah's calm continued to unsettle him. She had not retaliated. She had not scolded him. Instead, she had spoken with quiet authority, correcting without confrontation, instructing without anger, teaching without raising her voice. Realized that her control had been a test, a subtle assertion of dominance through expertise rather than brute force, and he had failed that test in the most visible way possible. Every instinct in him screamed to make amends, to regain footing, to restore some semblance of authority, but he understood that this required more than words. Respect could not be demanded through ego or rank. It had to be earned through understanding, collaboration, and acknowledgement of skill. And in that instant, admitted a truth he had long avoided. He owed her respect. He glanced around the room. Colleagues and subordinates were no longer tense. They were observing, recalculating their assumptions. The dynamic of the team had irrevocably shifted. Sarah's presence had redefined authority in that space. Rank alone was insufficient. Ability, discipline, and composure were now the defining factors. Felt a mixture of shame and grudging admiration, recognizing the imbalance he had created and the lesson he had been forced to learn under the most dramatic of circumstances. His thoughts returned to the punch itself. What had he expected? Submission, fear, compliance. None of those had materialized. Instead, Sarah had remained calm, unshaken, and perfectly composed. The force he had applied, meant to assert dominance, had been absorbed and neutralized by her skill. It was a revelation he could not ignore. He had underestimated someone with extraordinary capability and lived to see the consequences in real time. Mind raced with comparisons to his past experiences. He had led teams before, faced challenges, and issued commands under pressure. Yet he had never encountered someone like Sarah. He had never seen such seamless integration of intelligence, tactical acumen, and physical discipline in one person. Every action she took, every subtle gesture, revealed mastery, and he had failed to recognize it until it was too late. He realized that the incident had broader implications. Beyond personal embarrassment, beyond bruised pride, he had learned a fundamental lesson about leadership. Authority was not demonstrated through fear, force, or unilateral decision-making. It was demonstrated through competence, presence, and the ability to inspire confidence in those around you. Sarah had embodied all of these qualities, proving that true leadership transcends rank, ego, or impulsive aggression. Could feel the weight of that understanding settling over him. The punch had been a turning point, a moment that crystallized his own limitations and highlighted the extraordinary capabilities of the woman he had so badly misjudged. He knew now that the future interactions with her would require humility, observation, and a willingness to learn from someone whose experience and skill surpassed his own. Even as he sat back in his chair, attempting to regain composure, thoughts lingered on the broader mission. Operation Black Falcon was far from over, and every decision mattered. He now recognized that Sarah's insights were not mere suggestions. They were critical to the success of the operation. Ignoring them, as he had done impulsively, could have had catastrophic consequences. Respecting her expertise was no longer optional. It was essential. The team resumed work, the hum of monitors filling the space once more, but perspective had shifted irreversibly. He watched Sarah coordinate logistics, update operational maps, and relay instructions with precision. Each movement, each word, carried the weight of experience, training, and unwavering discipline. He realized that his own authority would only be meaningful if he could learn to integrate her skills into the mission, rather than attempting to dominate her through rank alone. The realization crystallized in a single, undeniable truth. Sarah was a Navy SEAL. The evidence had been all around him, in the precision, the calm, the discipline, and the absolute control she exhibited, even when physically challenged. And he had just experienced firsthand why underestimating a SEAL was a mistake no officer could afford to make. Exhaled slowly, feeling the tension in his body release just slightly. The embarrassment lingered, but it was now tempered by an understanding he had never truly felt before. The room had shifted, the dynamics had changed, and he knew that from this point forward, his leadership, his decisions, and even his ego would be tested in ways he had not anticipated. for the first time, understood the stakes, not just for the mission, but for the very nature of leadership. Authority was fragile when unearned. Competence commanded respect. And in Sarah, he had encountered a force far beyond anything he had anticipated, a reminder that true skill and discipline could never be underestimated. The war room continued its work, but mind remained fixed on the lesson he had learned. Sarah had not just survived his impulsive act, she had asserted her dominance without a word of complaint. And that realization, chilling and humbling, would guide every decision he made from that moment onward. He would never underestimate a Navy SEAL again. The aftermath of the confrontation lingered in the war room like a heavy fog. Lieutenant Mark sat at his desk, a rare mixture of humiliation and reluctant awe simmering beneath his otherwise composed exterior. The incident with Commander Sarah had not gone unnoticed. Word of the punch traveled quickly through the chain of command. Though the mission could not be delayed, a formal inquiry was imminent. Knew he would have to account for his impulsive act, not as a matter of pride, but as a professional obligation to the military structure he had spent years navigating. As the room cleared and analysts returned to their monitors, replayed the event in his mind, dissecting every detail, every motion, every reaction. The punch, meant to assert dominance, had instead revealed a deeper truth. Sarah was untouchable in ways he could barely comprehend. The SEAL's composure, her precise control, and her calm authority had turned his act of aggression into a lesson on humility and leadership. Even now, as he waited for the commanding officer to arrive, he felt a subtle but undeniable shift in the team's perception of him. Moments later, Colonel Daniels, the base commander, entered the war room. His face was a mask of stern authority, eyes scanning the room with the kind of experience that immediately silenced casual chatter. He stopped in front of, fixing him with a piercing gaze. "Lieutenant," he said evenly, "I've been briefed on the incident with Commander. I want a full report on my desk within the hour." Swallowed hard, he understood the gravity of the situation. Assaulting a fellow officer, particularly someone of Sarah's caliber, was not merely a breach of protocol. It was an act that could end careers, damage reputations, and compromise team cohesion. The realization weighed heavily on him, a mix of guilt and recognition that his impulsive act had gone far beyond personal frustration. As he began composing his report, reflected on the broader implications. Sarah had not retaliated, had not shouted, and had not shown fear. She had maintained perfect composure, demonstrating an authority and skill far beyond what rank alone could command. Recognized that his punishment would be a formal acknowledgement of misconduct, but the informal consequence, the respect and acknowledgement of her extraordinary abilities, was something he could not simply erase. Meanwhile, the team's dynamics began to shift subtly. Analysts and officers who had witnessed the punch watched Sarah with renewed admiration, their whispers of "she's a SEAL" more frequent and confident. Notice their quiet. They no longer deferred automatically to him in discussions. They now considered Sarah's insights with deference. Authority in the room was no longer dictated solely by rank. It was determined by skill, composure, and intelligence. Felt the sting of both embarrassment and revelation. He had underestimated someone whose expertise was not just formidable, but essential to mission success. As the inquiry unfolded, Sarah's professionalism became even more evident. She provided her account of the incident with precision, detailing facts without exaggeration or emotional embellishment. She emphasized the importance of focusing on the mission and minimizing distractions. Her clarity and calm demeanor only reinforced what everyone in the room already knew. She was a SEAL, trained to operate under extreme pressure, and her authority was earned through discipline and skill rather than title. Colonel Daniels reviewed report, listening carefully as the lieutenant recounted the events. Admitted fault fully, acknowledging that his actions had been impulsive, unprofessional, and entirely inappropriate. He explained the context, the tension, the disagreement over strategy, but offered no excuses. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him, yet he could not ignore the lesson that Sarah had imparted through her reaction. Skill and discipline could not be challenged through ego or force. The consequences, though formal, were tempered by the recognition of Sarah's restraint. Received a reprimand, a reminder that military decorum and chain-of-command protocols existed for good reason. However, the incident also served as a turning point in his personal development. He realized that leadership was not about asserting dominance or intimidating subordinates. It was about understanding the strengths of those around him, acknowledging their expertise, and integrating their skills into the mission. Over the following days, observed Sarah closely. Every action she took was precise, deliberate, and effective. She moved through the war room with quiet authority, coordinating logistics, analyzing intelligence, and guiding the team with clarity and efficiency. Could see the respect she commanded, not through fear or aggression, but through competence and calm. He understood, perhaps for the first time, the true meaning of leadership. It was earned, not assumed. He also noticed the subtle shift in how his colleagues interacted with him. Analysts and junior officers, who had previously looked to him for unquestioned guidance, now regarded him with measured attention, evaluating his decisions against the backdrop of Sarah's example. Felt a mixture of humility and determination. He could no longer rely solely on rank. He would have to prove himself through skill, collaboration, and respect for those around him. The incident also prompted to reflect on his own career. He had risen quickly through the ranks, often relying on confidence and authority to command respect. Yet Sarah's presence illuminated the gap between perceived authority and true capability. He realized that his success depended not on ego or aggression, but on his ability to recognize, learn from, and incorporate the skills of exceptional individuals like her. For Sarah, the aftermath was almost routine. She continued her work without seeking recognition or retaliation, her focus unwaveringly on the mission. Her professionalism reinforced the lesson to and the team. Authority and respect were earned through action, discipline, and expertise, not through force or intimidation. Every decision she made, every tactical adjustment she suggested, furthered her standing as a trusted leader. The team, initially shaken by the confrontation, began to integrate more smoothly under her guidance. Operations ran more efficiently as her input was considered seriously, her assessments trusted implicitly. While still grappling with embarrassment, began to defer to her judgment in areas where her expertise was evident. The dynamic of the unit had shifted irreversibly. Collaboration and respect now formed the foundation of effective leadership. Internal journey was profound. The formal consequences of his actions were clear: a reprimand, a recorded incident, and the expectation of improved conduct. But the deeper lessons were personal, psychological, and enduring. He learned humility in the face of superior skill, restraint in the management of ego, and the importance of acknowledging the contributions of others, regardless of gender, rank, or preconceived assumptions. By the end of the week, had made a conscious effort to adjust his behavior. He no longer dismissed Sarah's suggestions outright, nor did he react impulsively to challenges to his authority. Instead, he observed, listened, and weighed her insights carefully. Slowly, he began to rebuild credibility, not through dominance, but through recognition of skill and collaborative decision-making. The war room, once a stage for hierarchical command and unquestioned authority, had transformed into a space where competence dictated influence. Came to understand that the punch, while impulsive and wrong, had been the catalyst for this transformation. The incident had exposed weaknesses in his leadership approach, challenged assumptions, and ultimately forced growth. For Sarah, the consequences were minimal externally but profound internally. She had demonstrated restraint, skill, and professionalism under direct provocation. Her actions reinforced her authority and highlighted the importance of competence over rank. Her presence continued to elevate the team, inspiring confidence and trust in every operation. As left the war room that evening, the weight of the week's events settled over him. The reprimand would fade, the report would be filed, and the formalities of military procedure would continue. But the lessons he had learned, humility, respect for skill, the limits of ego, and the true nature of authority would remain. He had been confronted with excellence, and it had left an indelible mark. He glanced at Sarah, now reviewing mission reports with her usual calm precision. For the first time, he felt a genuine respect, not born of fear or obligation but of recognition. He knew that moving forward, collaboration with her would not just be a matter of protocol, it would be essential to success. And he also understood something more subtle but equally important. The incident had changed him, forever reshaping his approach to leadership, respect, and teamwork. The consequences of that single moment, the punch, the clash, the realization, extended far beyond the immediate reprimand. They rippled through the war room, transforming team dynamics, altering perceptions of authority, and instilling a profound lesson about humility, skill, and the enduring value of recognizing true expertise. Had paid a personal price, but the cost had been worth the insight it delivered. In the world of elite military operations, strength was not measured in force, but in discipline, knowledge, and the ability to remain composed under pressure. The week closed with the mission moving forward, the team more cohesive and efficient than before, and silently acknowledging the one truth he could not ignore. Sarah's authority was absolute, not because she demanded it, but because she had earned it, and he had learned, in the most dramatic way possible, to respect it. The days following the incident in the war room were marked by a subtle but undeniable shift in the dynamics of Lieutenant Mark, Unit. Operation Black Falcon, already complex and high stakes, now carried an additional, unspoken lesson. Authority was no longer measured solely by rank. Could feel it in the cautious, measured glances of his subordinates, the way analysts and junior officers deferred to Sarah's insight even before raising their own suggestions. The realization weighed heavily on him, but it also presented an opportunity to learn, adapt, and reclaim some measure of leadership in a more collaborative, competent way. Sarah moved through the war room with the quiet efficiency of someone accustomed to high-pressure environments. Every movement was deliberate, precise, and purposeful. She coordinated satellite intelligence, analyzed intercepted communications, and made recommendations with calm authority. Watched her closely, initially from a distance, studying her every move, understanding for the first time what true discipline looked like in action. Her skill was undeniable, her control absolute. And she commanded respect not through intimidation, but through excellence. Recognized that his prior approach, relying on rank, asserting dominance, and expecting compliance, was inadequate. The team was no longer operating under his unilateral authority. Instead, they functioned as a unit that responded to expertise. Sarah's presence had established a new standard, and realized that if he wanted to retain credibility, he had to adapt. He began to actively listen, taking notes on her suggestions and integrating them into the mission plan rather than dismissing them outright. The first joint briefing after the incident highlighted this shift. Analysts presented updates on troop movements and intelligence from drone surveillance, allowed Sarah to lead portions of the discussion, stepping back to observe. Her recommendations were precise, grounded in fact, and actionable. When she proposed adjustments to the timing of unit movements, initially bristled, old habits die hard, but the logic was irrefutable. Following her guidance, the adjustments reduced potential exposure significantly. For the first time, felt what it meant to lead not by asserting control, but by facilitating the best possible decisions through collaboration. As the week progressed, began to notice the subtle changes in team behavior. Officers who had previously deferred to him unquestioningly now balanced their respect between rank and expertise. Analysts sought Sarah's input first, then refined their reports with his approval. Junior officers began to approach differently, expecting him to evaluate proposals collaboratively rather than simply approve or reject them. The war room had transformed into a dynamic environment where skill, insight, and experience dictated influence, a transformation catalyzed by the punch incident and Sarah's measured response. experienced a range of emotions during this adjustment period. There was lingering embarrassment over his impulsive act, a grudging respect for Sarah's capabilities, and a dawning realization that he had much to learn. Yet within this discomfort, he began to find a sense of purpose. He could either cling to outdated notions of command or embrace a new approach, one that valued expertise, collaboration, and humility. Slowly, he chose the latter. Sarah's influence extended beyond operational decisions. She set the tone for professionalism, discipline, and accountability in the war room. Analysts and officers who had previously been hesitant to speak up now contributed more freely, encouraged by her calm but decisive leadership. Her ability to remain composed under scrutiny inspired confidence across the team, fostering an environment in which competence was recognized and valued over rank alone. Observed this transformation with growing admiration. He realized that her authority did not diminish his role. Rather, it enhanced the effectiveness of the entire unit, including his own leadership. One afternoon, as Sarah reviewed mission logistics, he finally spoke candidly. "Commander, I need to acknowledge something," he said, his voice steady but serious. "I underestimated you. I allowed my ego to interfere with judgment, and I was wrong. Your insight has been critical, and I want to make sure we're working together effectively." Sarah looked at him, her expression unreadable for a moment, then softened slightly. "Lieutenant, it's not about being right or wrong. It's about ensuring the mission succeeds. You recognize the lesson, now focus on applying it. That's all that matters." Her response, calm yet firm, reinforced the shift in mindset. Authority and respect were no longer earned through intimidation or rank. They were earned through competence, insight, and collaboration. Realized that by acknowledging her skill and integrating her guidance, he was strengthening his leadership rather than diminishing it. The dynamics within the team began to reflect this new understanding. Meetings became more interactive, discussions more strategic, and decisions more informed. Learn to value input from every member, particularly Sarah, who consistently provided insights that reduced risk and improved operational effectiveness. He observed the subtle ways her presence influenced morale and confidence, noting that her calm assurance allowed others to contribute more freely, without fear of ridicule or dismissal. As the mission progressed, noticed an additional effect. His own skills were sharpening. Collaborating with Sarah forced him to analyze information more critically, communicate more clearly, and approach decisions with both caution and confidence. He was no longer relying solely on instinct or authority. He was learning to synthesize data, intuition, and expert input to make better informed choices. The war room had become not just a place of planning, but a classroom in leadership and operational strategy. By the middle of the week, found himself adjusting instinctively to Sarah's presence. He anticipated her suggestions, cross-referenced her assessments, and incorporated her recommendations proactively. The tension that had once dominated their interactions had given way to a professional rhythm, one characterized by mutual respect and shared focus. Still retained command, but his authority was now enhanced by recognition of her exceptional skills, a balance he had never experienced before. The team responded positively to this shift. Analysts and officers who had previously been cautious now engaged more actively in planning sessions. Subtle cues, such as nods of acknowledgement, brief eye contact, and collaborative problem-solving, signaled that authority in the war room was evolving from rank-based command to skill-based influence. Watched this transformation with a mixture of satisfaction and humility, recognizing that his leadership had improved not because of his own efforts alone, but because he had learned to respect and integrate the strengths of others. By the end of the week, had fully embraced a new approach. He no longer reacted impulsively to challenges or perceived slights. Instead, he listened, assessed, and incorporated expertise where it was most valuable. Sarah's guidance became an integral part of every operation, and felt a renewed sense of purpose in his leadership role. The war room, once of authority and ego, had transformed into a center of collaboration, precision, and strategic excellence. Even in quiet moments reflected on the journey. The punch, the confrontation, the embarrassment, and the lessons learned had all contributed to a profound shift, not just in team dynamics but in his own understanding of leadership. Authority, he realized, was not a function of rank alone. It was earned through skill, demonstrated through action, and reinforced by discipline. Sarah had taught him this lesson in the most intense, unyielding way possible. As Operation Black Falcon continued, felt a renewed sense of respect, both for his team and for the mission itself. The war room had become a place of synergy, where competence, insight, and collaboration drove success. And at the center of it all, Sarah remained a quiet, commanding presence, an example of true leadership, resilience, and mastery. The lesson was clear. Leadership was not about who struck first, who spoke loudest, or who held the highest rank. Leadership was about recognizing skill, fostering respect, and guiding the team toward excellence. Had learned that lesson under fire in the heat of confrontation and through the quiet, unyielding example of a Navy SEAL. And in that lesson, he found the tools to become not just a better lieutenant, but a more effective leader. The tension that had defined the war room for weeks had evolved into a quiet, focused intensity. Operation Black Falcon had entered a critical phase, and every decision carried weight. Lieutenant Mark, having learned the hard way the cost of impulsive behavior, now approached the mission with a new mindset. He deferred strategically, listened carefully, and integrated Sarah's expertise into every plan. The transformation in their working relationship was subtle but profound. He no longer viewed her as a challenge to authority, but as a force multiplier, a partner whose skill and precision enhanced the entire team's effectiveness. The day began with a briefing on enemy movements detected through satellite surveillance. Sarah analyzed the data swiftly, pointing out patterns that had initially overlooked. "Lieutenant," she said, tracing a series of markers along the projected route, "the opposition is consolidating near the northern ridge. It's a weak point in their formation, but they've set up rapid response units. If we engage without accounting for that, we risk an ambush." Nodded, internalizing the assessment. "Understood. Adjusting our approach to integrate your recommended reconnaissance and flanking strategies." He felt a sense of relief and focus. No longer burdened by the need to assert dominance, he could concentrate on strategic execution. The team moved into operational mode. Analysts monitored drone feeds, communications officers relayed encrypted messages, and tactical specialists prepared the assault units. And Sarah coordinated seamlessly, their previous tension replaced by a professional rhythm. The war room hummed with precise energy, a testament to the discipline and focus that Sarah had instilled in the team. Hours into the operation, a critical challenge emerged. Unexpected enemy movements threatened to compromise the northern corridor, where a significant portion of the mission was concentrated. Assessed the situation quickly, but found himself relying heavily on Sarah's recommendations. She analyzed the data with surgical precision, identifying the optimal route for reinforcements and suggesting adjustments that minimized exposure and maintained operational integrity. "Lieutenant, if we redirect Alpha and Bravo units through the secondary ridge, we reduce exposure by 42%, Sarah advised calmly, her eyes fixed on the screens. "It's riskier terrain, but manageable given the terrain analysis and enemy movement patterns." Process the information, aware of the urgency. "Agreed. Execute the reroute and coordinate with command. Inform Delta units to adjust timing accordingly." As the team implemented the new strategy, observed the transformation in real time. Soldiers moved efficiently, communications flowed without delay, and potential threats were neutralized before escalating. The operation, once precarious, now progressed with a controlled, disciplined momentum, marveled at the precision and foresight Sarah brought to every decision. Her expertise was not just beneficial, it was indispensable. Midway through the day, found a quiet moment to reflect. The mission had reached a critical juncture, and every decision carried consequences. Yet for the first time, he felt a sense of calm confidence, not in his own unilateral authority, but in the collective skill of the team and the strategic guidance of Sarah. He realized that true leadership was not about issuing commands from a position of power, but about harnessing the strengths of those around him, trusting expertise, and facilitating effective action. The turning point came when an unexpected enemy counterattack threatened to overwhelm one of the units securing the northern ridge. The team faced a high-stakes dilemma: hold their current position and risk casualties, or execute a rapid tactical adjustment under extreme pressure. And Sarah coordinated seamlessly, drawing on real-time intelligence, terrain analysis, and unit readiness. "Lieutenant," Sarah said, pointing to a live feed, "if we establish a defensive perimeter here and deploy rapid response units along this corridor, we can intercept the advancing forces without compromising the ridge." Nodded. "Implement immediately. I'll coordinate with field units and ensure communications remain secure." The execution was flawless. Units responded with precision, guided by Sarah's assessment and facilitation. The enemy advance was contained, and casualties were minimized. The operation shifted from a precarious engagement to a controlled tactical maneuver, all because of the effective integration of skill, insight, and leadership. For the moment was transformative. He had learned to trust, to delegate, and to recognize expertise without letting ego interfere. The war room's dynamic, once dominated by rank and authority, had evolved into a system where skill and insight dictated action. Sarah's leadership had not only ensured operational success, but had also reshaped understanding of his role and responsibilities. As the day progressed, the mission reached its final phase. The coordinated efforts of all units, guided by strategic planning and real-time intelligence, brought the team to the enemy's main stronghold. And Sarah reviewed the final approach, refining details and anticipating contingencies. Every adjustment, every decision, reflected the synergy that had developed between them. "Lieutenant, ensure that the timing of the final assault aligns with the support unit's arrival," Sarah advised, her tone calm but firm. "Any deviation could expose vulnerabilities. We maintain precision, not haste." Nodded, acknowledging the critical point. "Understood. Coordination confirmed. Execute final phase." The operation unfolded with meticulous precision. Units advanced in synchronization, communications remained secure, and potential threats were neutralized efficiently. The combination of Sarah's insight and coordination transformed a complex, high-risk mission into a controlled and successful engagement. When the final objective was secured, a palpable sense of relief and accomplishment filled the war room. Analysts, officers, and tactical units exhaled collectively, recognizing the success achieved through disciplined execution and collaborative leadership. For the first time, felt a profound respect not only for Sarah, but for the strength and cohesion of the team. In the aftermath, reflected on the journey from confrontation to collaboration. The punch, the tension, and the lessons learned had all culminated in this moment of operational success. He understood that leadership was not demonstrated through force or ego. It was demonstrated through the ability to recognize, integrate, and amplify the strengths of others. Sarah had that principle with unparalleled skill and had experienced firsthand the power of earned respect and disciplined action. The mission's success, the war room's transformation. Analysts continued refining intelligence, units remained coordinated, and found himself operating as a facilitator rather than a dictator, ensuring that expertise guided decisions, not ego. The synergy between him and Sarah had become a model of effective leadership under pressure, demonstrating that collaboration and respect could achieve results far beyond what unilateral command could accomplish. As the day drew to a close, approached Sarah, offering a nod of genuine acknowledgement. "Commander, your guidance was instrumental today. I can't overstate how much I've learned from your approach." Sarah's expression softened slightly, though her composure remained firm. "Lieutenant, The success was a team effort. You facilitated decisions effectively and ensured coordination. That's leadership too. Remember, it's not about being the loudest voice, it's about being the most effective. Absorbed her words, realizing that the lessons of the war room extended far beyond a single mission. They applied to every aspect of leadership, teamwork, and respect. The turning point of Operation Black Falcon had not only secured the mission's objectives, but had reshaped the very way he understood command, authority, and collaboration. The success was celebrated quietly but sincerely among the team. Analysts and officers, once cautious and hesitant, now engaged with confidence. Subordinates respected for his humility and ability to integrate expertise, and Sarah's authority was recognized without question. The war room, once a site of tension and conflict, had evolved into a hub of disciplined collaboration, strategic precision, and mutual respect. Understood, finally, that the punch had been a catalyst, not a failure, but a turning point that forced growth. Sarah's unyielding discipline, skill, and professionalism had not only guided the team to operational success, but had also transformed him as a leader. From confrontation to collaboration, from ego to humility, the lessons of the mission would resonate for the rest of his career. In that moment, the war room was no longer defined by hierarchy or rank alone. It was defined by skill, respect, and the ability to act decisively under pressure. And at the center of that transformation stood Sarah, a Navy SEAL whose calm authority, precision, and expertise had turned a potential disaster into a triumph, forever reshaping the dynamics of leadership, teamwork, and respect in the process. The war room, once tense with unspoken rivalries and fragile egos, now resonated with quiet confidence. Operation Black Falcon had concluded successfully, not because of rank or unilateral decision-making, but because of collaboration, discipline, and respect. Lieutenant Mark, who had begun the mission with pride and impulsive authority, now understood the full weight of leadership, its responsibilities, its nuances, and its delicate balance between command and humility. The punch that had sparked tension weeks earlier was no longer a source of shame alone. It had become a defining moment in his career, a turning point that reshaped his perspective and forged a deeper respect for skill and expertise. Sarah moved through the war room with the same calm efficiency that had first impressed and intimidated. But now the atmosphere around her was different. The team deferred to her naturally, not out of fear or obligation, but because of earned respect. Analysts followed her recommendations with confidence, junior officers sought her advice without hesitation, and himself recognized her insight as critical to every decision. Her authority had been tested, proven, and universally acknowledged. She did not need to assert it, her presence alone commanded it. Reflected on how far he had come. The initial punch had been impulsive, a misguided attempt to assert dominance, yet it had forced him to confront his assumptions, his ego, and his understanding of leadership. He had learned to observe, to listen, and to integrate expertise into decision-making. Authority, he now realized, was not demonstrated through force. It was earned through competence, judgment, and the ability to inspire confidence. Sarah had embodied all of these qualities, and her example had reshaped his approach to command forever. The final debriefing of Operation Black Falcon brought the team together for reflection and evaluation. Colonel Daniels reviewed the mission's outcomes, highlighting successes, analyzing mistakes, and emphasizing lessons learned. When he turned to and Sarah, he noted their collaboration as a model of effective leadership under pressure. This operation succeeded because you integrated expertise, coordinated effectively, and maintained discipline under extraordinary circumstances, Daniels said. Lieutenant, your growth in leadership was evident. Commander, your guidance ensured the team's success. The praise was formal, but the lessons were personal. Understood that this recognition was not a reward for rank or authority. It was an acknowledgement of the ability to learn, adapt, and lead effectively. He had been tested in ways that went far beyond conventional training, and he had emerged with a renewed understanding of what leadership truly required. Outside the war room, the ripple effects of the mission were already evident. Analysts and officers spoke more openly, offering insights and recommendations without hesitation. Communication flowed more smoothly, collaboration replaced conflict, and the unit functioned with a newfound sense of cohesion. Observed this transformation with pride and humility, recognizing that his own growth had facilitated a stronger, more capable team. The lessons learned were not merely operational, they were foundational, shaping the culture of leadership and respect for the months and years to come. Sarah's role extended beyond tactical guidance. Her professionalism, restraint, and discipline had become a model for the entire unit. She had faced direct aggression from a superior, absorbed it without retaliation, and continued to operate with unwavering focus. This had not only preserved the mission's integrity, but had reinforced the importance of earned authority, competence, and calm under pressure. Every officer and analyst in the room had witnessed firsthand what leadership through skill looked like, and the impact would be lasting. Approached Sarah privately after the debriefing. "Commander," he said, his tone measured and sincere, "I want to thank you not just for the mission but for the lessons you've taught me. I underestimated you, and I can't undo that mistake, but I can ensure it never happens again. Your example has changed how I understand leadership and respect." Sarah looked at him, her expression calm and composed, yet with a subtle warmth in her eyes. "Lieutenant, the past cannot be changed, but you've shown growth, and that is the measure of a true leader. Authority isn't about ego, it's about responsibility, judgment, and the ability to bring out the best in your team. You've learned that lesson, and I trust you'll continue to apply it." The conversation marked a turning point not only but for the unit as a whole. He had embraced humility, collaboration, and the recognition that leadership was dynamic, situational, and often dependent on the strengths of others. Sarah's influence had transcended her immediate actions. She had reshaped the way authority, respect, and competence were understood within the team. Over the following weeks, applied these lessons consistently. Meetings became collaborative, decisions were informed by expertise rather than ego, and team morale improved dramatically. Analysts contributed confidently, junior officers felt empowered, and the unit operated with efficiency and cohesion previously unseen. Transformation inspired subtle changes in others as well, fostering a culture where skill, discipline, and mutual respect guided every action. Sarah continued to serve as the anchor of this new dynamic. Her calm authority ensured that operations remained precise, risks were mitigated, and decisions were executed with clarity. Her presence reminded everyone that true leadership was measured not by intimidation, but by the ability to inspire confidence, maintain discipline, and act decisively under pressure. Now fully aware of this truth, worked alongside her as a partner rather than a superior attempting to assert dominance. In the months that followed, Operation Black Falcon became a case study in leadership and teamwork. Military analysts documented the operation's success, emphasizing the critical role of collaboration, expertise integration, and disciplined decision-making. Personal journey, from impulsive aggression to thoughtful, collaborative leadership, was highlighted as a testament to the transformative power of humility and respect. The lessons of the war room extended beyond Operation Black Falcon, carried them into future missions, mentoring junior officers and fostering a culture of collaboration and respect. Sarah's example remained a guiding force, her calm authority and expertise serving as a benchmark for effective leadership. The punch incident, once a source of tension and humiliation, had become the catalyst for profound growth, both for and for the team as a whole. As reflected on the journey, he realized that the legacy of that moment extended far beyond the immediate consequences. Leadership, he understood, was not about asserting dominance or reacting impulsively. It was about recognizing skill, fostering collaboration, maintaining discipline, and earning respect through competence and integrity. Sarah had demonstrated all of these qualities, and in doing so, had reshaped not only his understanding of leadership, but the culture of the unit itself. The war room, once of ego and rank, had transformed into a model of disciplined collaboration. Analysts, officers, and soldiers now operated in a cohesive, respectful environment where expertise guided action, and decisions were made with precision and care. Personal growth and Sarah's unwavering professionalism ensured that this transformation was lasting. In the quiet moments after the final report was filed, watched Sarah review operational data. The weight of the lessons he had learned settled over him, profound and enduring. He understood that true leadership required courage, humility, and the ability to recognize the strengths of others. The punch, the confrontation, and the high-stakes mission had forged a deeper understanding of authority and respect, one that would guide him for the rest of his career. Sarah glanced at him briefly, acknowledging him with a subtle nod. In that gesture, saw affirmation not of rank but of earned respect. The journey from impulsive confrontation to strategic collaboration had been complete. The team had grown stronger, more capable, and more cohesive. Leadership had been redefined, not through force or intimidation, but through skill, discipline, and mutual respect. Operation Black Falcon had succeeded, and in its wake a new standard of leadership had emerged. Had learned the hard way, but he had learned well. Respect was earned, authority was demonstrated through competence, and true leaders inspired, guided, and elevated those around them. The legacy of the incident, and of Sarah's quiet, commanding presence, would endure, shaping every mission, every decision, and every member of the team for years to come. As the war room lights dimmed and the team departed, felt a profound sense of clarity and purpose. The journey had been arduous, the lessons hard-earned, but the result was undeniable. Leadership was no longer a matter of asserting rank. It was a matter of cultivating skill, fostering respect, and guiding a team to achieve excellence. And at the center of that lesson stood Sarah, a Navy SEAL whose discipline, insight, and calm authority had forever changed the trajectory of a lieutenant, a team, and a mission.